A land of legends and majestic landscapes, Scotland harbors stories that have endured through the centuries. From the mystique of Edinburgh to the remote corners of the Highlands, the country's historical and mystical legacy is found at every step. In the heart of these lands, surrounded by overwhelming beauty, lies the colossal Loch Ness, a vast and deep lake. It is the stage for one of the world's most fascinating and enduring legends, a tale rooted in the collective imagination about a beast inhabiting its waters. For hundreds of years, stories about a creature living under that opaque veil have captivated generations. A legendary beast that we have searched for over centuries, and that, despite everything resting on fantastic tales, refuses to disappear from our lives. A being we have named the Loch Ness Monster. Thousands of people have come to these shores, driven by the hope of glimpsing something beyond the ordinary. Attracted by the dark waters of the lake, by the supposed sightings, photographs, and films, by the mystery that awaits in the depths of the Scottish lands. Since the 1960s, many scientific expeditions have tried to solve the enigma of what we affectionately named Nessie. Large technological deployments and extensive searches to put an end to the speculations and reveal whether this monster is real or pure fantasy. But none was able to close the door to those who wanted to believe. There was always room for the legend to grow stronger. But in 2018, a team of scientists from the University of Otago in New Zealand announced that they were prepared to write the final chapter in the saga of the Loch Ness Monster. To conduct the definitive study of what lies beneath the lake and determine if there is really something that would force us to rewrite history books. After more than 30 years since the last great expedition, the scientists were going to carry out an unprecedented study. They were going to take water samples to analyze the DNA present in it, coming from the tissues of the animals that live in the lake. Any creature inhabiting its depths would have left a trace in the form of genetic material. If the Loch Ness Monster was there, if an unknown creature had been cautiously hiding from us, they would find DNA that did not match anything previously discovered. Essentially, they were going to use forensic technology to close centuries of speculation. Whatever they discovered, even if it rejected the existence of a monster turned powerful tourist attraction, the results of their study were going to cause a media hurricane worldwide. They had a few months before they would rekindle the legend. And aware of the earthquake they could unleash, with the threat of a wave of misinformation, they had to prepare. They had to delve into the history of the monster, into the dark waters of that lake, and into the details of that tale turned legend. And the starting point was clear: understanding the origin of the myth. The first written reference to a mysterious creature in the Scottish lake is found in the work Vita Columbae, written by Adomnan, the 9th abbot of Iona, around the year 700. The most important biography about the miracles of St. Columba, a 6th century Irish missionary who played a crucial role in spreading Christianity in Scotland and, above all, in the birth of the legend. According to Adomnan, in the year 565, Columba was traveling through the land of the Picts, near the river Ness. While preparing to cross it, he encountered two locals burying a man who had been attacked and killed by a water beast that lurked in the waters. Impressed by the tragedy, he decided to confront the creature, sending one of his men to swim to attract it. As soon as it emerged from the depths, Columba raised his hand and made the sign of the cross in the air, commanding the beast in the name of God to stop and retreat. The beast immediately obeyed, fleeing terrified down the river. The same river that flows into Loch Ness. The locals, witnesses of the miracle, were astonished and filled with gratitude towards Columba, who had thus demonstrated the power of his faith and was deserving of the title of saint that he would eventually receive. With Adomnan's work, the story of that creature was told from generation to generation. The idea of a beast inhabiting the waters of that place had become anchored in the collective imagination of the Scottish Highlands, But it was not until much later, when that region ceased to be isolated from the world, leaving that strange limbo in which it found itself, that the tales became something much larger, with the key turning point in the creature's history. On April 14, 1933, Mr. and Mrs. McKay were driving along the road on the north side of the lake when Aldi, the woman, saw something in the water. What they described was something the size of a whale emerging from the water and furiously churning the surface for a couple of minutes before returning to the depths. Perplexed by what they had seen, they told their story to a correspondent for the Inverness Courier. The journalist from the so-called capital of the Highlands wrote an article describing the couple's sighting, using for the first time the word that would change the course of history. The Loch Ness Monster had been named. The readers showed enormous interest in the news, hidden on page 5 of the newspaper. The sighting had a great impact in Inverness, north of Loch Ness. There was not a single person in the region who hadn't heard of the monster. The excitement grew, and with the arrival of summer, the story attracted tourists to the shores of the lake, eager to see a creature about which we knew absolutely nothing. But within weeks, the second sighting began to shape the image that endures to this day. On June 22, 1933, another couple, this time Mr. and Mrs. Spicer, were driving along the lake road when they saw, according to their testimony, a large creature, about 6 meters long, with skin similar to an elephant's and an extremely long neck, crawling along the shore towards the water. The Spicers were considered credible witnesses, and what was already an authentic fever broke out. Hundreds of people came to the lake, hoping to be the next lucky ones, with the hope of spotting something in its waters and seeing the monster up close. A monster that the newspapers said without a doubt existed in the waters of Loch Ness. In an era when the press had so much power, no one doubted what was being written. The Loch Ness Monster became an unquestionable reality, and the media impact was such that by the fall of that same year, the stories crossed the borders of the Highlands in Scotland and reached London, the political, social, and cultural heart of the United Kingdom. Inevitably, from there, the monster phenomenon spread like wildfire throughout the country. Tourism to the lake began to reach enormous numbers, and soon the number of sightings reached 50. The Scottish and English press echoed each and every one of them, as any edition that talked about the creature automatically became a success. But they were aware that in a short time, words would no longer be enough. They needed evidence. Irrefutable proof of the monster's existence. In this context, that same fall of 1933, the Daily Mail, one of the UK's most influential and popular newspapers, announced that they would fund the first scientific expedition to Loch Ness to conclusively investigate whether the monster existed. To do so, they assembled a team of experts led by Marmaduke Wetherell, a famous British hunter, actor, and film director, an eccentric explorer and adventurer nicknamed Duke, whom the newspaper hired to travel to the lake and send daily reports to London of his findings. After 2 days of scouring the shores without finding anything, on the third day, news arrived from the Highlands. They had found the footprints of a large creature in the mud beside the lake. Duke took photographs and made a plaster cast, assuring the newspaper that he had proof of the monster's existence, of a being that he estimated would be about 6 meters long. The next day, to recoup the investment of that costly operation, the Daily Mail published the news on its front page. The Loch Ness Monster is real. We have proof. We have footprints. A 20-centimeter foot with 4 large toes and claws accompanied the striking headline. While the entire nation was amazed by what seemed to be the discovery of the Holy Grail of zoology, the plaster casts arrived at the Natural History Museum in London to be examined by a committee of experts. However, with the publication of the official report, the museum members informed the newspaper that the footprints did not belong to any new species. The footprints were not from a monster. They could say with complete certainty that the casts belonged to the track of a hippopotamus. It had all been a fraud. The footprint was from an ashtray that Duke had used in a film years earlier, made from a hippopotamus's foot. He had simply taken it with him to the lake, pressed it into the ground, and tried to pass it off as the track of that supposed monster. With all the evidence against him, the Daily Mail published a new article publicly humiliating Wetherill, who ruined his career because of that lie. But despite this, despite a fraud being behind the big news, the public did not lose interest in the beast. All that uproar did was strengthen it. Now, all the media wanted was the next step. It was only a matter of time before word stopped selling copies. They needed visual evidence. The odyssey to get the first image of the Loch Ness Monster had begun. In the spring of 1934, as the world eagerly awaited a photograph capturing the creature in full splendor, that gift came from the hands of a renowned London surgeon. Dr. Robert Kenneth Wilson arrived at the offices of the Daily Mail with a freshly developed photograph and a story. He had just returned from a trip to the Scottish Highlands, where he stopped at Loch Ness to photograph native birds. The famed doctor claimed that while pausing at the shore, he saw something move in the water. A creature was emerging from it. Before it submerged again, he took his camera and captured the following photograph. Wilson had an image of the Loch Ness Monster, a highly reputable gynecologist from the capital with absolute credibility, the snapshot they had been waiting for months. The Daily Mail published what had been dubbed the surgeon's photograph on its front page. The image was so astonishingly revealing that it broke all boundaries. The myth left the UK to become a global phenomenon. Within days, the image appeared in newspapers worldwide. The Loch Ness Monster had achieved international status. The story of a strange creature inhabiting the depths of a Scottish lake spread to dozens of countries. Everyone knew Nessie, the affectionate nickname by which the monster became known. The surgeon's photograph had become perhaps one of the most famous pictures in history. It was the starting shot in the race to find the monster. People from all corners of the globe gathered at Loch Ness, eager to capture it again on camera. A fever so intense it brought enormous sums of money to the surrounding towns. Nessie was already a tourist attraction, a business that would soon become a $1 million industry, all based on a photograph that was promised to be real. However, archives revealed that 60 years after its publication, and with hardly any media noise, the authenticity of the surgeon's photograph was questioned. A fraud involving a former key player in the story, Duke Wetherill. In 1994, almost as a deathbed confession, Christian Sperling, Duke's stepson, recounted that after being humiliated by the Daily Mail for faking the footprints with that ashtray, his stepfather wanted revenge on the newspaper by proving the monster was real. A young Christian helped his father fabricate a model of the beast using plastic, wood, and a toy submarine resembling the descriptions of supposed eyewitnesses. With it, Duke traveled to the lake, placed the model in the water, and took a photograph. Now he just needed someone to make the photo public, and who better than his friend Kenneth Wilson, a reputable gynecologist whom no one would doubt. He only had to hand him the negatives and ask him to go to Inverness to develop them and then take them to the Daily Mail. The photograph that ignited the phenomenon was a fraud, another deception orchestrated by Duke Wetherill. In fact, Sperling held another photograph that his stepfather took that day, a more panoramic version showing the context without perspective tricks. What had been sold as a 6-meter-long creature in that image, considering the shore and distance as references, was clearly a toy no more than 70 centimeters long. There was no monster. Nevertheless, the surgeon's photograph's fraud didn't come to light until the 1990s. 60 years to let the legend's pillars settle into popular culture and our collective imagination. With it, that spring of 1934, everything exploded. In the following years, hundreds of sightings were reported, and dozens of photographs allegedly capturing the monster were published. Everyone wanted their 15 minutes of fame. Everything became so corrupted, there was such an oversaturation of information about it, that little by little, the media interest in the beast began to fade. The drive to hunt the monster ceased definitively with the outbreak of World War II, but it was reborn years later with one of the great historical sightings, one that could not be ignored by the scientific world. In October 1955, a bank manager was driving along the shore of Loch Ness near Urquhart Castle with his son when their car broke down. While the son repaired the engine, Peter McNabb descended the slope to take a photograph of the castle ruins. But at that moment, something in the water caught his attention. A pair of humps emerging from the water. A large creature swimming towards the castle. McNabb captured that moment and took the photograph to the Scotsman, a newspaper edited in Edinburgh. After receiving confirmation from experts that it was not manipulated, they published it, rekindling interest in a legend of which only faint echoes remained. The Loch Ness Monster once again made front pages in newspapers around the world, but more than 20 years after the beginning of it all, people no longer wanted photographs. What the world demanded was definitive proof, something that couldn't be manipulated. Footage of the beast. They wanted to see the monster come to life. Motivated by this ambition, a young English aeronautical engineer named Tim Dinsdale arrived at Loch Ness on the morning of April 23, 1960, equipped with his 16mm movie camera. Convinced the myth had to be real, that it was impossible for so many people to be lying, he wanted to give the world a clear and unequivocal film to end the mystery. And on the 5th day of his trip, he saw something dark in the middle of the lake begin to move. Astonished by what his eyes were seeing, he turned on the camera and for 4 minutes filmed about 6 meters of footage, capturing that body undulating towards the north shore. He had in his hands the first film of a creature inhabiting Loch Ness. After 2 months of guarding the footage in hopes of obtaining a better one, on June 13, 1960, the video appeared on Panorama, the BBC's flagship newscast. About 10 million people watched Dinsdale's film, ushering in the second golden age in Nessie's history. Among all those viewers was Peter Scott, an English ornithologist and conservationist. A renowned and respected figure at the forefront of broadcasting in the UK, who was fascinated by the footage and the possibility, however remote, that an undiscovered species existed in Loch Ness. With a network of contacts reaching the royal family, Scott fought for the scientific community to finally take the story seriously, eventually getting prominent British zoologists on his side. All he wanted was a coordinated search for the so-called monster. The prospect of finding a new animal in those waters was so enticing that he was willing to risk his reputation. Together with David James, an Antarctic adventurer and now a politician, he laid the foundation for what they hoped would be the definitive investigation, a coordinated search for that hypothetical being. The tireless public relations efforts of both men led to the conception of what they christened the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau. For the first time in history, science was going to enter those waters. We were going to investigate what lurks in Loch Ness. With the establishment of the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau, LNIB, a group of volunteers from all ages and backgrounds who shared the desire to capture irrefutable evidence of the monster joined the organization to try and confirm its existence. David James leveraged his contacts in the military to acquire old military equipment and organize the expedition's infrastructure. The foundation behind the research was straightforward. monitor the lake's surface 24 hours a day, recording continuously until Nessie made an appearance. Throughout the decade, LNIB attracted monster hunters from around the world who had a clear goal in mind: obtain footage better than Dinsdale's. This goal was realized 5 years after the project's inception, when one volunteer captured footage showing something moving in the water alongside a boat, allowing for a size comparison. Scott and James sent the footage to the Royal Air Force Special Photography Unit, who concluded that if it was a real body and not a mere optical illusion, it would be a creature about 2 meters long moving at about 8 kilometers per hour. The two founders had their star moment. After years without conclusive evidence, they had footage that justified the £20,000 investment and gave believers a reason to strengthen their faith. Following this, a new wave of monster hunters arrived at the lake, but someone stood out above all. Unrelated to the organization that had gathered all enthusiasts, a lone wolf garnered significant media attention. Working alone from the other side of the lake without contact with LNIB, English photographer Frank Searle began publishing incredible images. He was getting closer than anyone. The photographs appeared real, described by journalists from the newspapers to which he sent them as the best images ever obtained. Living in a camp on the lake shore, Frank Searle eclipsed the volunteers of the project, becoming the public face of the quest to reveal Nessie's identity. Such was his media impact that he not only made a living from his photographs, but also attracted over 20,000 visitors annually to his camp, which he turned into a museum, and above all, a shop. Frank sold his images and a newsletter to tourists eager to meet the man behind the incredible monster photographs. He claimed to have had 38 sightings with the creature, of which 12 had been immortalized with photographs and 1 with film. But although his initial intent to hunt the beast may have been genuine, over time, the desire for fame and money took precedence. He increasingly published higher quality photographs. While initially no one doubted their authenticity, suspicions eventually arose. They were too good to be true. In some, you could even see the creature's face. On the other side of the lake, dozens of people with military equipment were achieving nothing. And he, with just his camera, was capturing portraits of the supposed monster. Frank's credibility was called into question, especially due to his constant refusals to send negatives for photographic analysis. But finally, the empire he had built collapsed under its own weight when it was discovered that one of his photographs was a copy of a tourist postcard featuring a Nessie drawing. It had all been a hoax. And despite Frank Searle disappearing never to be seen again once again, that fraud embedded itself in the collective imagination. His photographs, though false, largely fueled the boom that occurred in the 1970s. Thousands of people were flocking to the lake. Nessie had become a product, a tourist attraction. You could buy candies shaped like Nessie, car stickers, towels with its face, Nessie ashtrays, and t-shirts of the famous monster. Shop owners in the towns didn't care whether the monster existed or not. What mattered was that the mystery surrounding the lake was bringing in what would ultimately amount to over £50 million to the local economy. And all those who had dedicated their lives to its search had to watch as hopes faded bit by bit. They had spent a decade watching the waters tirelessly, and beyond dubious sightings, frauds, blurry photographs, and footage of questionable credibility, they had nothing. But even though morale was very low, there were those who still believed, thinking that perhaps our mistake was simply waiting for it on the surface. Perhaps the answer lay in exploring the deep and dark waters of the lake. After all those years of failures, in 1972, an American team arrived at Loch Ness with cutting-edge technology and a budget much larger than LNIB's. The leader of the expedition was Robert Rines, an American lawyer and scientist acclaimed for his contributions to the field of sonar navigation and location, a technology he believed was the only one that could solve the lake's mystery and reveal whether a huge creature truly dwelled in its depths. Loch Ness is immense, about 37 kilometers long and 260 million cubic meters of water, making it the largest by volume in all the British Isles. A title it holds due to its unusual depth. The deepest point in Loch Ness rests 200 meters below the surface. A vast abyss obscured by plant remains filtered from the mountains. The waters act like a veil, shrouding the narrative in an unbreakable cloud of darkness. Light was not useful for deciphering what might await in its depths. Only sound could betray the presence of a creature dwelling in the lake's abyss. Bob Rhines brought with him sonar, a technology that uses sound waves to detect and locate objects underwater. The basis of his plan was straightforward. A device called a transducer, suspended under the hull of a boat at 4.5 meters deep, would send sound pulses into the depths. These sound waves would travel through the water until they encountered the lake bed, or perhaps the creature. Upon striking that bed or a body, they would return to the transducer, which also acted as a receiver. The sonar would then measure the time elapsed between emission and return. If something had been encountered halfway, the waves would have returned sooner, thus deducing the passage of a creature beneath their feet. As founder of the Academy of Applied Sciences, he brought to the lake equipment valued at $250,000. Underwater lights, 4 cameras that would automatically activate upon a positive signal, sonar, and a computer, something extremely unusual at the time. Everything they needed to pierce that dark veil and capture the beast. And finally, on August 8, 1972, they captured something in the depths of the lake. As usual, the boat's sonar operation began late at night, when the waters were calmest. After midnight, around 1 a.m., a large disturbance appeared on the readings. A large object was moving towards them until eventually disappearing, losing its trace. Whatever it was, it had been something large, about 4 meters long. And if a living being was behind it, there was a reasonable chance the cameras had photographed it. The feeling was one of absolute optimism. On the reels could be the image that would circulate the globe and confirm the existence of the Loch Ness Monster. Within it lay what could be a treasure, the proof that for half a century we had sought unsuccessfully. Bob Rhines took the reel, unsure if there was anything on it, and carried it with him to the United States for development and processing. If there was something, and due to the poor quality of light and water, the photograph would have to undergo digital enhancement, the reliability of which only the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory could guarantee. Everything had led to this moment. It was time to see what lay in the depths. Nearly 3 months after that night on the lake, with rumors spreading worldwide that the team had captured the image of the century. On November 2nd, 1972, at the Boston Convention Center in Rhines' hometown, a symposium was held where he claimed to have photographic evidence of moving bodies in Loch Ness. The proclamation sparked enormous anticipation and media frenzy significant enough for the British Parliament to summon Rhines to present these images in the House of Commons at Westminster Palace. This event was covered by journalists from around the globe, where Rhines finally presented to a packed audience of politicians and scientists a photograph. An image that seemed to show the belly of an animal with skin resembling that of an elephant and a flipper. A sort of prehistoric creature inhabiting the Scottish lake, as he asserted before the media. Accompanying this was an image said to be its head, resembling that of a gargoyle, and another appearing to show its entire body. These 3 photographs were presented as irrefutable proof that a beast lives in the depths of the lake. The press conference made headlines globally. The images adorned the covers of newspapers worldwide, sparked debates on major television networks, and became an international phenomenon. They even secured publication in Nature, the world's most prestigious scientific journal, providing a powerful stamp of legitimacy. Despite respected scientific institutions like the Natural History Museum outright rejecting the existence of large creatures in the lake, once again, this snapshot took root in the collective imagination. The flipper photograph was the game changer, but there was something odd about it. Shadows could be seen on both sides, which shouldn't happen with a single light source like the one they used. Suspicions about it and the digital enhancement Rines commissioned from NASA were strong enough to contact the person behind that computerization. They located Alan Gillespie, the man who had worked on the photographs at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He informed them that just as he had told the media in 1984 without gaining any traction, the enhanced images he had delivered to Rines bore no resemblance to those that were published. Gillespie sent copies of the enhanced versions from NASA. They had nothing to do with the flipper picture published in Nature. It was just a confusing blur. No trace of the flipper. It was evident that someone had manipulated the image to include the flipper. The photograph had undergone a second digital enhancement, and in the United States, there were only 2 computers capable of this. One was his, in that NASA laboratory, and the other was at the Academy of Applied Science, of which Robert Rines was the founder. It was clear that it was a fraud, and considering he sold the photograph for £50,000, it was quite profitable. Nevertheless, this finding did not come to light at the time. Evidence of the forgery, like the surgeon's photo before it, was suppressed. There were too many interests invested in keeping the mystery alive, and they clearly succeeded. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, the Loch Ness Monster once again became a global phenomenon, an icon of the country. There were still people searching for the creature, and the scientific community, unaware of the true reality behind the alleged photographs, became increasingly involved. So much so that in 1987, an American company proposed to the government to conduct the best and most comprehensive expedition to the lake in history. Dubbed as Project Deepscan, the scientists' idea was to create a sonar curtain across the lake. An ambitious scientific study in which they were willing to invest $1 million to demonstrate whether the monster really exists. A line of small boats sailing in formation, each equipped with sonar, across its 37 kilometers of length. Their technology was so fine that they could detect a fish as small as 5 centimeters at depths of hundreds of meters. With this curtain moving from one end to the other, nothing could escape. The start of Deepscan gathered journalists from around the world, making the event one of the most heavily covered media events of the decade. And under the gaze of the world, the 24 boats were deployed, covering its entire width to ensure a complete and detailed sweep of the deep waters. During the project, the sonar teams detected several large echoes at considerable depths that could not be definitively identified. Despite finding no evidence that they were caused by a creature like Nessie, Deepscan reinforced the mystery surrounding the lake. The detection of unexplained signals, which could well have been mere sonar anomalies or large fish, kept the legend alive, reinforcing the idea that the monster was a prehistoric creature we thought extinct. Since the publication of the surgeon's photo in 1934, there was talk that the Loch Ness Monster could be a plesiosaur. Marine reptiles that lived during the Mesozoic era, approximately between 266 million years ago, coinciding with the mass extinction that ended the reign of dinosaurs. The first fossil was found in 1821, and since then, many others have been discovered worldwide, with a particularly relevant concentration in what is now Scotland. These animals were characterized by a robust body up to 4 meters in length, large fins, and a long, slender neck, a description that matched the early sightings and culminated with the surgeon's photograph. Back in the 1930s, the idea that several plesiosaur specimens might have somehow survived in Loch Ness was not so far-fetched. In fact, the theory gained significant traction when in December 1938, near the coast of South Africa, a coelacanth specimen was found, a fish species considered extinct for millions of years. Before this specimen was found alive, coelacanths were known only through fossils dating back 66 million years, leading scientists to believe they had become extinct alongside the dinosaurs. This discovery opened the door to a similar phenomenon possibly occurring with plesiosaurs, supposedly evading total extinction in that refuge in Loch Ness. However, the hypothesis of Nessie being a prehistoric creature lacked sense from a simple biological standpoint. Plesiosaurs breathed through lungs, so despite being able to hold their breath for a long time, they had to surface constantly to take in oxygen. If Nessie were such a beast, we would be seeing images and videos daily of an entire population of plesiosaurs. It would be impossible for them to have remained hidden. If this alone didn't dismiss the hypothesis, the lake's own biochemistry did. The waters are very nutrient poor. The food chain cannot sustain large creatures, let alone a community of them. It's estimated that in the lake with the largest volume in all of the United Kingdom, there are barely 20 tons of fish. Large predators cannot survive in it. Not to mention that Loch Ness was formed at the end of the last glaciation, which ended approximately 10,000 years ago. Plesiosaurs could not have found refuge with an extinction that occurred 66 million years ago, because there was still an eternity left for their supposed home to be formed. All of this made the plesiosaur theory belong to the realm of fiction. It was supported by a photograph we knew was a hoax, a toy of a monster floating in the water. There were many other plausible explanations for Nessie sightings. The activity of native birds, like ducks flying overhead, creating the optical illusion of a creature swimming on the water's surface, could be behind many distant sightings. Even boats could be the origin of many sightings. The turbulence they generate on such a tranquil lake can linger in the water long after they have passed. The waves formed in combination with shadows from the surrounding mountains can create shapes that indeed appear to be similar to a creature gliding like a serpent. Likewise, tree trunks, vegetation remains, and even carcasses of dead animals can float on the water, accounting for many sightings. Simultaneously, as with many others, the bottom of Loch Ness can release methane gas bubbles trapped in its sediments. These bubbles rise rapidly to the surface, creating disturbances in the water that can be interpreted as the movements of a large creature. When you add the influence of the legend itself, everything magnifies. The popularity of the myth can influence how people interpret what they see. Those who expect or wish to see something out of the ordinary are more likely to misinterpret natural phenomena. In the eyes of someone who wants to believe, there's always room for monsters. After a long period with no breakthrough in solving the mystery beyond increasing exploitation of Nessie and the legend surrounding it, in 2012, Jeremy Wade, the presenter and marine biologist, proposed an intriguing theory about the Loch Ness Monster that revived scientific interest. The British broadcaster suggested that sightings could be explained by the presence of a large shark in the lake. Descriptions of a hump and undulating movement were characteristics that could match certain species, specifically the Greenland shark. This shark is one of the largest in the world, capable of reaching lengths of up to 7 meters, known to inhabit cold, deep waters of the North Atlantic, including areas near Scotland. Its dark, rough skin could explain descriptions of a large creature with skin similar to that of an elephant. Additionally, its slow, undulating movement could be mistaken for that of a monster which rarely ventures to the surface. The main problem with his theory was that Greenland sharks are marine species, and although it might be possible for them to venture into coastal waters and potentially enter Loch Ness through connections with the sea in certain historical periods, adapting to freshwater posed a challenge. However, 4 years after Wade's theory, a scientific study revived interest in it. In 2016, a team of researchers from the University of Copenhagen published an article in Science demonstrating that Greenland sharks were the longest-lived vertebrates in the world. Radiocarbon dating established the age of one specimen at over 400 years, with scientists marking the lifespan at around 510 years. This longevity reopened the doors to speculation. Nessie had always been described as a solitary creature. For any other animal, we would have needed an entire population constantly reproducing to account for decades of sightings. With that Greenland shark, knowing it could live for several centuries, just one specimen would suffice. It was the first time in history that science found an empirical path to solve the mystery of the Loch Ness Monster. And this was where the team from the University of Otago in New Zealand came into play. The ultimate goal of their genetic study of the lake, initiated in 2018, was to find traces of Greenland shark DNA. If Nessie was one of them, they would find its genetic material and the puzzle would be closed forever. Finally, after following the trail of the beast to what many hoped would be the final turning point, on September 5, 2019, they presented the results of their research. Neil Gemmell, the study's leader, held a press conference where he announced that after analyzing 500 million DNA sequences in the lake, they found no evidence of genes from any shark species nor from unknown animals. But they did find something that could be of interest to the community. Of the 300 species of animals they managed to identify, a large amount of genetic material belonged to the European eel. The depths of Loch Ness are teeming with these creatures. Although most specimens do not exceed 80 centimeters, it was not entirely implausible to imagine some growing to exceptionally large sizes, beyond the recorded length for their species. A giant eel moving swiftly and stealthily through the water would fit those descriptions of a creature with a long body and serpentine movement. The eel theory was providing a natural and biological explanation for all those decades of sightings, with the study helping to demystify the phenomenon. DNA had led us to one of the first plausible descriptions of Nessie. However, it is likely that not all encounters with this supposed beast have the same cause. Some could be explained by the presence of eels, but others by optical illusions from waves, reflections of light, or any other natural explanation presented over the decades. Exploring history made it clear that all those who arrived at the lake, no matter how skeptical they were of the mystery, did so hoping to see something. And when there is that desire, it is inherent in our human nature to convince ourselves that there might be something there. All that history, in believers and skeptics alike, had its foundations in the inevitable need to believe. Because in all those sightings there exists something almost religious. The feeling of having been chosen. Real or not, Nessie has changed the lives of many. In one way or another, we have all searched for something in that lake. Some have sought the beast, others what people promised to see. Whether we created it or not, it all boils down to the same old story, tales between humans and monsters. From its mysterious depths to its tranquil shores, Loch Ness has witnessed countless dreams and fears reflected in its dark waters. Beyond the quest for a legendary creature, it reminds us of our need to believe in the unknown, in the impossible, in that which defies our understanding. Because in a world where everything seems written, it is in places like this where we find that small spark of wonder and adventure. The mystery will never close because deep down, no one wants it to. Loch Ness will continue to harbor that enigma, that everlasting invitation to explore, question, and dream. A quest to uncover not only the secrets of the lake, but what dwells deep within our being.